I have a son who has schizoaffective disorder. He was in respite, which is sort of halfway house for if you may need to go into the hospital, but it's not quite sure. You go there, and it's a very relaxing, nice place out near the dairy barn. And people can go in and out, and people can visit. So he wanted to go walking through the woods. We walked right across the street and then just walked up through the woods, and all of a sudden discovered Cemetery 3, which was in terrible repair. And it was kind of shocking. We spent, ever since about the beginning of the century, renovating these cemeteries. They put it over the head of the coffin. Well, the coffin will sink down that much, and the loose dirt that they throw in is also going to sink down. Pretty bad grave collapse. We filled in, but then it's collapsed again to some extent. Where is it? Beep, 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 beep. His name is Daniel Prindle, or was, and he was just dug up by a groundhog. Not all of him. The bones were pretty disintegrated. They were just pieces of bones. So that was the condition that these cemeteries were in when we started this. Actually, in the 19th century, we treated the mentally ill much better than we treat them now. The idea was that if you had a really nice, beautiful asylum that treated them morally, they would become moral. Mental illness was viewed as a moral defect. Well, they were treated morally, but not, obviously most of them didn't recover. So that was the way it was set up here in Athens. And all institutions like jails and prisons and children's homes and so on had stacks of institutional stones, sequentially numbered. Each one had a different number, and if somebody died, they'd take the next number off and use that, and then they'd record who the person was. This is one of the very, very few well-preserved old mental hospital cemeteries in the country. Families have always had the opportunity, if they identify themselves and show the relationship they have to a particular deceased person, to place a gravestone. And we help find where they were buried, and then if they come visit, we help take them to the spot, and if they want to place a stone, we actually place the stone. They can have it made, and then we'll go pick it up and we place it up there for them. This panorama of little red, white, and blue flags indicates what or is a pretty good, gives a good impression of what the Civil War cost to the people. They didn't die in the Civil War, but their lives were ruined by post-traumatic stress disorder that was inflicted on them in the Civil War. So it was a huge sacrifice. For several decades after the Civil War, the majority of the men in all the mental hospitals were Civil War vets, even though they were relatively young, and they almost certainly had, most of them, post-traumatic stress disorder. That it ruins your life because you come back angry, you can't keep a family, you can't keep a job, and you end up committing suicide or going to jail, or in this case, being in a mental hospital. She was a young farm girl born in 1908, and on these poor country farms there was not a great deal of need for women, and so when she reached the age of 15, her father married her off to a 29-year-old man who then kept her pregnant for the next 4 years. 3 of the children survived, 1 didn't. And then she was brought to this hospital, probably with postpartum depression, which she would have gotten over, but she got tuberculosis. There was also a tuberculosis ward over here, and she died in her 20s in 1934. Well, one of her daughters, Dorothy, they came up here one spring day and spread a blanket out there and sang Amazing Grace. Her middle name is Grace, and Dorothy, of course, was in tears, but there were tears of joy that her mother was finally recognized, and there was a sort of, well, they used the term closure. Dorothy had always felt cheated that her mother was taken away from her, and that she really didn't know much of what happened to her until much later. And in our ceremonies, we always pick out people that are sort of exemplary of the fact that these were human beings. They weren't just, quote, crazy people. They may have had a mental illness, but underneath they were human beings. The situation with the mentally ill and how society treats them is worse, so now we just ignore them. And that shouldn't be. It's the father or somebody with mental illness, he might have ended up here. So that fact sort of moved me and has moved a lot of people to restore these cemeteries.